Hey guys, welcome yet again to another crash course, and in this video we're going to be looking at the awesome technology of React Native. So before we get into it, let's just take a look at what will be covered in this video. So first thing we're going to talk about is what React Native is. I have multiple videos on the React.js library, but what the hell is React Native? Okay, so that's what we're going to take a look at first. We're also going to look at how to install React Native and set up a React Native app. Now, even though I'll be using Windows, using the React Native CLI is the exact same on Windows or Mac or Linux. It's NPM based, so it's cross-platform. What varies is the OS development environment and testing, and I'll go over that in a minute. So I'll show you how to initialize and run an app in the Android emulator, how to create components just as you would in regular React. We'll look at some of the key React Native UI features such as input controls, list views, touchable elements, and more. We'll also look at some of the API features such as async storage and the messaging API. And if you still want more, there's a ton to learn in the Eduonics course, which I'll be linking in the description. Alright, so what is React Native? React Native is a framework for building mobile apps using JavaScript and the React library. So if you don't have any idea what React is, I would suggest going back and watching my crash course on React.js. Alright, basically it's a library for building interactive user interfaces in Java with JavaScript. So React Native allows us to build cross-platform applications. We can build one app that will run on Android and iOS, which is incredibly valuable to businesses and individuals. Instead of building an iOS app in Swift and then a separate app in Java for Android, you can have a single app that will run on both platforms. Alright, and we'll talk about the advantages to that in a minute. So React Native uses almost all of the concepts that React.js uses, including components, application state, props or properties, life cycles, and so on. So if you know React, then you should have no problem at all understanding the fundamentals of how this framework works. Alright, now we've seen frameworks in the past that allow us to build mobile apps with JavaScript. Okay, we have Cordova, also known as PhoneGap, Ionic, Senka Touch, and some others. Now unfortunately, these are what are called hybrid apps. And these are basically web apps that run inside of a native container or a web view. React Native apps are not hybrid apps. Okay, they don't run inside of a web view. They use the same fundamental building blocks as real native apps that are built with Swift or Objective-C or Java. All right, so this makes them faster, gives the user a much better experience, much like you would with a real native app. Alright, now don't get me wrong, these are great technologies, Ionic and Cordova, and they do deserve credit, but I do think that React Native is going to be the go-to technology for mobile apps built with JavaScript. So let's take a look at some of the advantages of building a React Native app over an actual native app. So one of the biggest is that it's cross-platform. So usually if a business makes the decision to build a great mobile app, they'll start off with just one platform, iOS or Android. Now I know that there's Windows and BlackBerry and some others, but we're going to stay focused on the two big guys. Now of course they could choose to build one app for both, okay, so one Android, one iOS, and try to have the same experience, but that gets incredibly expensive. You would need a Java developer or multiple Java developers for your Android app, and then Swift or Objective-C developers for your iOS app, and both of those cost an arm and a leg. With React Native, you just need to know JavaScript and React, and your app will run on both platforms. So think about the difference in cost between those two options. And this isn't for some clunky web app inside of a container. This is a real native app. Alright, so you can see the potential of React Native. Alright, and obviously it's much easier to code. JavaScript is much easier than those high-level compiled languages. You save massive amounts of time. Even in development itself, there's no compiling. You don't have to keep recompiling every time you make a change. It just updates, and you can constantly see your work, okay, your updated work. It's also open source, and of course, React Native is free. Alright, so these are all some really nice advantages to using React Native over, a real native app. Alright, so let's start to look at some of the features that are available with React Native. So we have different UI components that we can include in our app, and these are just some of them, some of the key ones that we'll be going over. So we have input controls like the text input, a picker, which is kind of like a drop down but nicer, a switch, a slider, which is an element that you can drag across the screen and kind of increase values and so on. We also have touchable elements. Now, one of the biggest differences between a web mobile app and a native app is that with a web app, when you tap a button, you don't really get any effect. You get the standard browser effect, which isn't very, it doesn't feel very natural. And with React Native, we have these elements. We have touchable highlight, touchable opacity, that makes it really feel like a native app. You get that highlight, that effect when you touch an element. It doesn't have to be a button. It can be absolutely anything. All right, list views, which are just that. If we have a list of I don't know, users or locations, contacts, whatever it may be, we can put those in a nice list view. We can use Flexbox to style it, make it look really nice. We also have scroll views for things that we want to scroll, whether it's horizontal or vertical. We have things like alerts, modals, progress bars. We can customize the status bar, so where the battery is, the battery life, and things like that. And we can do that on both devices, both platforms. Now, we also have components that are exclusive to Android or to iOS. So, for instance, Tab Bar iOS gives you the little tabs at the bottom of the screen, and that's only available for iOS. Okay, and then we have Toolbar Android, which is the toolbar at the top of the screen, and that's only available for Android. And we can easily separate pages so that one will load if it's on Android, one will load if it's on iOS. Alright, and that will make more sense later on. Now we also have APIs for device interaction. So for instance, we have the camera roll where we can bring in images from the device into our application. Async storage, which we can use for storage on the device, and it works almost identical to local storage, HTML5 local storage, except it's asynchronous. We have geolocation, image editor. We can have push notifications on both platforms. You can even work with the vibration API and also the sharing or message API, where we can send things in text messages. Now, as far as our development environment and operating system, in this video we're going to be using Windows, and with Windows you need to set up the Android SDK. Alright, now specifically you need to have the SDK version 6.0 or also called Marshmallow at this point to use React Native, and it states this on the main Getting Started page. Alright, so you want to download Android Studio, you want to get that SDK installed, and you also want to set up the Android virtual device. Okay, that's how we'll view our application, test our application. Now, I do have a video taking you through all the steps to set this up. I'll put that in the description, so if you don't have Android Studio and the SDK set up, just go ahead and watch that video. I tried to lay it out really simple, so just get that done before actually attempting this. Alright, and for Mac, all you really need to do is set up Xcode, which comes with the simulator that will allow you to view and test your app. Alright, and I will probably do a video on setting up React Native on a Mac as well, which is, truthfully, it's a little easier than on Windows, in my opinion. Now, the last thing I want to do before we jump into installing React Native and looking at some code, I just want to check out a really simple component in React Native. Okay. Now, if you know React, this probably looks really familiar to you. We'll start at the top here. We're basically just importing the React library from React. And then on the next line, we're importing some stuff from React Native. Okay, we have this app registry, which we use to register the component. We also have text and view, which are two components that you'll be using a lot to display view areas as well as text. All right, then we have our class. In this case, it's called MyApp, and it extends that component package. And you can see we have a render, which if you know React, this looks very familiar. This is one of the lifecycle methods the only one that's actually required, and it just renders content. Alright, so we're returning a view, and inside that view we have a text block that just says hello world. Alright, now notice we're not using divs or h1s or anything like that. It's a little different in that aspect, but it's really easy to get used to. Basically, you can style views and text however you want using JavaScript, but it's formatted like CSS. Alright, so if you have those skills, if you have CSS skills and basic HTML, then you'll catch on to this pretty quick. Alright, and then down at the bottom, we're taking that app registry and calling register component, and we're just passing in the name of that component, and then a second parameter, which is a callback, or actually an arrow function, and we pass in the name once again, my app. Alright, so that's basically a boilerplate of a very simple React Native component. Alright guys, that's enough with the slideshow. Let's go ahead and jump in. We'll install React Native and we'll set up our application. Alright guys, so let's jump into React Native. Now you'll notice I'm on Windows, but as long as you have your Mac Xcode environment set up, almost everything I do is going to be the same on a Mac, and I'll let you know when something's going to be different. So if you're on Windows, you do need to have the Android SDK set up and the Android virtual device. If you don't, then go back to the last video I made called Android SDK and AVD setup for React Native, and that'll get you set up to this point that I'm at now. Alright, so notice that I have the Android virtual device open, and then I have two command lines. Alright, so first thing we want to do is we want to install the React Native CLI, the command line interface, and that's where we can create our application, run our application, and we're going to install that using npm. So obviously you do have to have Node.js installed. Alright, so to do that, we're going to say npm install. We're going to add the G flag for global. Okay, we want to be able to run this from anywhere, and then we're going to say React Native-CLI. Now the command we use is going to be React Native, but make sure that you don't do that, install React Native. You want to make sure you do the CLI. Alright, I already have it installed, so it'll probably go quicker on my machine. Alright, so now that that's set up, you also want to install Yarn, which is a new package manager for JavaScript, and you can use it for a lot of things, but it pushes along the initialization of the app. So let's just get that installed. We'll say npm install g yarn. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is initialize our app. So I'm in my projects folder. You can obviously do this wherever you want. It's going to create a project folder. So to do that, we say, not npm, we say react-native init, and then the name of your app. We're just going to call this my app. Alright, now that's going to go through, and you can see it says using Yarn. Alright, if you don't have Yarn installed, I believe it'll give you some kind of message saying you should install it. Now, as far as the app we'll be building, we're not going to be building an actual functional app. Well, what this is it's a crash course where we're going to go through. I'm going to show you how to get everything set up, and I'm going to show you some of the UI components that are available, touchable buttons, things like that, ListView. We'll also look at some of the stuff with the API, async storage. So it's going to be kind of just a mesh of different things you can do in React Native. Alright, so we're not going to be building some nicely planned out functional application. Alright, just to let you guys know, I will be doing a video where we do create an actual application, but this is more for just to get your foot in the door and just to really see what's available with React Native. And obviously I can't go over everything. The Eduonics course that I created does go over pretty much everything as far as the fundamentals, so you may want to check that out. But let's just open up the documentation while that's going. Alright, so if we go to docs, you'll see on the left hand side here, this is some of the stuff that we're going to be going over. Now, I'm not going to really get into the concepts of React. I'm expecting that you know those as far as state, components, things like that. I will be going over it, but I'm not going to take a deep dive into it. If you want to learn React, then check out the crash course that I have for React.js. But we'll be going over styling. Let's see, if we go down here, all these components, we have the ListView. Okay, it gives us some code samples. It's actually really good documentation, in my opinion. The Navigator. Okay, so we can navigate between pages or scenes. Text input. We have different input controls. So we'll just be creating basically mini components with these functionalities. Alright, so let's go ahead and CD into my app. Okay, so now we're in the project folder, and what we want to do is we want to start up what's called the React packager. Alright, and that's going to allow us to run our app. So we're going to say React-native start. Alright, and that should start up the packager. Okay, so it says React packager ready. Now what we want to do is open it up on our device, open up our initialized app. So I'm going to leave that running and then go into another command line, and we're going to say React native run-Android. And if you're on a Mac, you want to do run-iOS. Alright, so we got to go into the My App folder. Okay, so that's going to go ahead and run, and it should open on our virtual device. Alright, remember, if you don't have this set up, go back, watch that Android SDK setup video. If my video, for some reason, doesn't help you out, there's plenty of others out there to get it set up. Just make sure that you also install SDK 6.0 because that's what React Native needs to run, at least at this time. And this might take a minute. Okay, so you can see it's starting up. It says build successful over here, so it should start up no problem. And there it is. So that's the boilerplate for our React Native app. Now, what's awesome about this is that when we edit our files, we don't have to recompile or anything like that like you would with a standard Java Android app. We can just simply double tap R on our keyboard and this will reload. Alright, now it says to get started, edit index.android.js. So let's go ahead and open up, I'm going to open up my editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code. Of course, you can use whatever you'd like. And then I'm just going to open up our folder, my app, which is in projects. Okay, now if we look over here, we have a couple different folders. We have Android. Okay, this is where our Android application lies, and then we have iOS. Okay, this is where all the iOS stuff is. Now, for the most part, we're not going to have to touch either of those. All right, what we deal with is this file here, index.android and index.ios. Okay, so it's the same app, but when it's opened on an iOS system, it'll read this file. Open on Android, it'll read this file. Alright, so if you just did everything we just did on a Mac, this right here would say edit index iOS. Okay. Now the idea that, well, at least what I do, is create a folder called app and then just import that into both of these files, and then of course anything that is proprietary to iOS, we can, fix that file. Anything on Android, we can do it in that file. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a folder called app. Alright, and remember, it's React, so we're dealing with components. So I'm going to create a folder called components. Okay, and everything we build is going to be inside of a component. Alright, now let's take a look at index Android. Now, instead of going through all this, I think the best thing to do is just to wipe it all out and then just start from scratch. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let me just show you that we can edit this. So we'll say welcome, we'll change this to welcome to my app and save it. And then over here, let's click on the emulator and just double click R or double tap R. And now you can see welcome to my app. So no recompiling or anything like that. We can just edit and we can reload. Now if you do a Control M on the device here, there's a few different options. You can choose to reload. You can debug JS remotely, You can enable live and hot reload. Now if you do hot reload, every time you save your file, it's going to go ahead and reload. And you may want that, but I'm just going to leave it off for now. I may enable it later. And there's some other stuff as well, stuff that I really haven't dealt with. You could use the inspector, also look at the dev settings. Alright, and then to close that, just click somewhere else. Alright, so let's go back over here and just get rid of everything in our index Android. Now, this is one of those times if you're on a Mac, you have to work in index iOS JS, okay? But it's the same idea. You can put everything that we're putting in here, you can do in the iOS file. Alright, there may be a couple components that are specific to Android, but I'll let you know that. Alright, so starting up here, let's go ahead and import. We want to import React and the component package, which we're going to wrap in curly braces. And that's going to be from React. Okay, now we also need to import stuff from React Native. So we want app registry. And then remember we want to use text and view, okay? Text is when we want to output text, and then view is basically just a view area where you want to include different elements. So those are going to be from React Native. Alright, and that's all we have to import. Now we want to set up our component, and this is, by the way, this is our main component, okay? Every other component we build, we'll just import into this, and we'll just throw it in. Alright, so we want to create our class by saying export default class, and we're going to call this my app. Since it's our main component, I'm going to give it the same name as our actual application, and we'll say extends component, okay, which we're bringing in right here. Alright, and let's just skip down after the class, and then we're just going to say app registry dot register component. Okay, this is going to register our component, obviously, and then we're just going to put it in my app. Alright, and then the second parameter is going to be a callback or an arrow function we're going to use. I'm going to say my app, just like that. And now it works very, very similar to React.js. Alright, so we're going to have a render. Okay, and in our render we want to return something. Okay, so we're going to return. Now, just like with React, you can only return one element. Okay, obviously you can have multiple elements, but they have to be contained in that one element. So we're going to return a view. Alright, now in React.js you'd probably use a div, but we're not using divs, we're going to use view. And then we just want some text, so we're going to wrap that in text. Alright, let's just say hello world. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. And then we're going to go over here and double tap R. Okay, now it says application my app has not been registered. This is either due to a require error or initialization. Alright, so let's see. Oh, you know what? We want to use all lowercase here. Sorry, guys. Like that. Alright, let's try that. So we can just click reload down here. And now we get hello world. Now, up to this point, what I'm going to do is just copy this and put this right in index iOS. Save that, and then if we were to view this on iOS, we'd get the same exact thing. Alright, so you basically just got to manage these two files, and for the most part they can be the exact same unless you have some proprietary iOS stuff in there or Android. Okay, so what I want to do now is create another component that we can include in here and then work in that rather than just edit this index file. Alright. So in the components folder, let's create another folder, and I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call it component 1. Okay, and I like to keep the uppercase for the component file name and the folder name. So inside there we want a file component1.js. Alright, and then we can copy everything we put in the Android because it's going to be formatted the same way. Alright, except we're going to change this to component1, and down here alright, and then we'll just change the text here. We'll say this is component1. Save that. And then we're going to go back to index Android, and we just want to import that. Okay, so we can just say import component1, and that's going to be from, and we want to go into our app folder that we created, components slash component1 slash component1. Alright, and then what we'll do is just replace this text right here with component1, just like that. Alright, and let's save that, and then we'll go and reload. And we get this is component1. Okay, and then we can simply take this, put that right in the iOS file, and we have a cross-platform application with a cross-platform component. Alright. I'm going to close the index iOS for now because we're not really working with that. But what I want to do now is just spend a little bit of time on React concepts, alright, and just show you how those are pretty much the same in React Native. So let's work with properties. So with properties, when we have a component, we can say, for instance, we can say message equals, and let's say hello world. Okay, so we can pass props or properties into a component. We can do that in React Native as well. So let's save that, and then we'll go into our component1, and let's just replace this here, and we'll say this dot props dot message. Save that, reload, and now we're getting hello world. Okay, we're passing a property into component1 and displaying it. Now we can do the same thing. We can use state just as we would in React. So we'll add a constructor here, and we're going to say actually we need to pass in our super, and then we'll say this dot state equals, and let's say name Brad, and then we'll go down here into the render, and let's put another text in, and we can say this dot state dot name. Okay, we'll save that. Let's reload, and we get Brad. Okay, so we can store state up here in our constructor. That's where you want to initialize it. And if we want to put another value up here, we can say show name and set that to true by default. And then what we'll do is go above the return and create a variable. We'll say let name this dot state dot name this dot state dot name. Okay, so basically we're saying if this is true, then that's what we want to show, this dot state dot name. Else, then we'll say no name. Oh, all right, and then we'll just replace this with that name variable. All right, so save that. Now we should still get Brad because it's true. Okay, but if we go and we set this to false and reload, let's see, show. Oh, this needs to this needs to be show name. Okay, so now we get no name. All right, set it back to true. and we get Brad. Okay. Now, usually what we want to do when we pass in properties is make that into a state. Okay. Well, not, I shouldn't say usually, but sometimes you want to turn that into state. So what we could do is in the constructor say props. You also want to pass it into super, and then we can say message and set that to this dot props dot message, and then we should be able to change this to this dot state dot message. Okay, and we should get the same thing, hello world. Okay, and we can also have default properties. So if we go right here and say static default props and say message, and let's just say hi there. Now ignore this red line. This is just the editor thinks that it's an error, thinks that this has to be in a TS file, but it doesn't. So if you're using Visual Studio Code, just ignore that. Alright, so let's save that, and then we'll go back to our index Android and just get rid of the message. Save it, reload, and we get hi there. Okay, it's looking at our default props. So you can see if you know React.js, this is this should come very easily. Now, if you want to debug and you want to be able to use a console, I know we're not in a browser, so what we could do, there's a few ways to do it, but what I like to do is I'm going to open up another terminal or another command line, but I'm going to use the integrated terminal within this editor, within Visual Studio Code. So if we go to integrated terminal, it'll open up a command line in this folder, and then what we can do is say React native and then say log Android. Obviously if you're on iOS, it's log iOS. So now we can debug. We can, for instance, let's go in the render and we'll say console.log, say hello, and save that. And then if we go and run it, you can see we get hello. Okay, so we can now log things to the console. Alright, so what about styling? Okay, so when it comes to styling, we use JavaScript, but it's formatted as the same key values as CSS. Okay, and what we're going to do is bring in from React Native, we're going to go up here and we're going to say we want to bring in StyleSheet. Okay, actually, you know what, before we do that, we can leave that, but you can also do inline styles without that StyleSheet. So if we want to go to, let's say, all right, you know what, let's create a new component and do this. All right, so let's go into our components folder and create a new folder called component2 and component2.js. Okay, and then what we'll do is copy what we have in index Android. Very, very simple. Okay, get rid of this import component1, change the class name, also down here. Okay, and then what we'll do is let's put a text. We'll say hello Brad, save it, and then in index Android what we'll do is just change this to component2 here and here and here. Okay, save it. Okay, so now component2 is what's displaying. So let's bring in StyleSheet. Okay, and to show you we can use inline styles, what we can do is set, from this text, we'll say style equals, and then we'll use double curly braces. All right, and let's say color red. Save that. And now you can see the text is red. And we can add styles to views as well. Let's say background color, and we'll set that to, let's do black, but we can do hexadecimal. Okay, so that's how we can add inline styles, and you don't need the style sheet to do that. But if you want to have, if you want it to look more like a CSS file, what we can do is import style sheet and then say const or let or var styles equals style sheet dot create, and then we'll pass in an object, and let's give this view, we'll say style. Now we're going to use the single curly brace, and we're going to say styles dot my view. Alright, and then we'll take this one and say styles dot my text. Alright, and then down here we'll say my view, like that, and let's say background color, and let's make it blue. Then we're going to put a comma here and say my text, and we'll say color white. Okay, let's save that. And there we go. Alright, so it's formatted close to CSS. Now notice that background color, we don't have background dash color. It's set to camel case, okay? So that is a big difference between CSS. Alright, instead of doing that. Okay, we can also use Flexbox or a version of Flexbox. So let's say we want to do 3 boxes in a row right here. Alright, so what we'll do is create a view, and let's make that the flex container. So we're going to say style equals styles dot, and let's just call it container. Okay, and then inside that, and then we're going to put 3 views in here, and let's give it a style. So we'll say styles dot, let's just say, we'll just say V1, I guess. Okay, and then I'll copy that. Actually, let's put a text in here as well. Okay, and we want 3 of these. And then I'm just going to change this to 2, 3, 2, 3. Okay, so let's save that and reload up to this point. Now I really didn't want this inside of the blue area, so let's see, what I'll do is, let's end this view here, like that, and then the container, let's see, container is going to need, or we'll just get rid of this. Actually, we can't do that because it has to be wrapped. What we'll do is just add another view here, I guess, because it has to be just, it has to return one single element and then have all the other elements in between. Alright, so that should work. Okay. Alright, now what we want to do is basically have 3 blocks, 3 boxes here. So what we'll do is, now that we have styles, we have a container for our flex container, and then V1, V2, and V3. So let's go down here and we'll add in our container. Okay, and for the container, we want to make sure we set the flex direction to row. You can also do column. Notice that with CSS we would do flex dash direction, but React Native we need to use camel case. So let's see, we'll do that, and then let's also set a height to the container. So height, we'll say 100. Alright, and it's just 100, it's not 100 pixels or anything like that. Okay, and then what we'll do is add our v1. Okay, and let's set it to flex 1, and we'll set a background color. Let's say background color red. Okay, this isn't going to look good at all, but I just want to show you how it works, you know. And then let's see, we'll set a padding of 10. Okay, so now let's put a comma there, and then we'll just copy this, paste it in twice, remove that last comma. This will be 2 and 3, and then we can change this to, let's say, green, and we'll say black. Alright, so let's save that and reload. And reload. And there we go. So now we have 3 blocks, all even widths. Okay, now I'm not going to go into Flex. I have a video called Flexbox in 20 minutes that you may want to watch if you want to learn more about Flexbox. But just know that we can use Flex and to lay out our design or lay out our UI. Now, if we were to, let's say for the black, for V3, if we go color white and we save that and reload, you'll see that it's not working. Okay, the reason for that is that view, you'll see the little message down here, view does not have that color property. Alright, so what you would need to do here is add it to the text. So we could say style equals style dot, or styles dot, we'll just call it vtext. Alright, and then down here, get rid of that, and we'll say vtext color white. Okay. And now we can see the text because color is a property that we can use on text, not on view. Alright, hopefully that makes sense. So the next thing I want to look at is touchable highlight. Okay, so we're going to bring this in. Now there's touchable highlight and there's touchable opacity. Let me see if I open up the documentation. And you can put this on anything, a button, a view, text, whatever you'd like. Okay, so let's see. Right here, touchable highlight, touchable opacity. There's also touchable native feedback, touchable without feedback, which gives you no effect, which you probably don't want to use. But if we click on this, you'll see that we can include it and we can add an event on press. In this case, it's going to call the function underscore on press button. Alright, so let's go ahead and wrap, let's see, we'll wrap the first view here, V1. So we'll say touchable highlight and end it here. Okay. And let's add on press. And we're going to set that to this dot, I guess we'll just say on press. Okay, you can call that whatever you'd like. And then what we'll do is above render, we'll say on press. And let's just do a console.log. And we'll say area pressed. Okay, let me just tab this tab this render over. Alright, so let's save that, and we'll go back and reload. Alright, now, let's see, why did that happen? Okay, so now when I click it, notice that we get that effect, and we're getting area pressed. As far as that, the flex, let's see, I guess we would want to put the style or the flex one onto the touchable highlight instead of the view. Let's see if that does it. There we go. Alright, so now click that. You can see we get that effect. Alright. Now there are some properties to touchable highlight. So if we go to the documentation, let's see, active opacity determines what the opacity of the wrap view should be when touch is active. But what I want is this underlay color. This is the color of the underlay that'll show through when it's active. Alright, so if we go and let's just make this a little cleaner. Alright, and we'll set underlay, and let's set that to, let's just test it out. We'll set it to blue. Okay, so now when I click that, oh, that didn't work. Oh, underlay color. Okay. Alright, so now when I click it, you can see that we get a blue underlay. So now let's try the touchable opacity. Okay, and for this, we'll wrap it around view 2. Okay, and let's set on press. We'll set it to this dot on press 2. Okay, and we'll say area 2 pressed. Alright, and then let's move the style to touchable opacity. Okay, so save that and reload. Okay, so now when I click that, you can see that effect. Okay, it goes really slow because of the device. If it was on a real device, it would be quicker. And you can see we get area 2 pressed. Okay, and that has its own properties as well. If we go to the documentation, and let's see. Oh, it looks like we just have active opacity. Okay. Alright. So that's how we can handle touch events, and obviously you can have anything you want happen when you click these. I do want to get into the Navigator in a little bit, but before we do that, let's look at some of the other UI stuff. This video is going to be quite long. I really don't want it to be that long, so we're not going to get to too much. Like I said, if you want to, pretty much check out all of this stuff, then I would suggest checking out the Eduonics course. We look at pretty much all, not all of it, but most of the important ones. So now what I want to do is look at some input controls. So we have text input, which is, where is it? Text input right here. Alright, so we can put a text input, and it has this on change text so that we can We can reset the state whenever we type something in, or whatever it is that we want to do. So let's create another component for this. So we'll say new component, component 3, component 3.js, and let's see, what do I want? We'll just grab, actually let's just copy what we have in index Android. Put that in there. Okay, get rid of that, and we'll change this to component 3. Okay, we want that down here as well. Save it, and then we'll go to index Android and just change this, these, and this. Okay, so now that should show component 3. Alright, and then what we're going to do is bring in text input. Okay. And we're going to replace this text with text input. Alright, let's see, we're going to end that with a slash, and then this is going to take in a bunch of different properties. So we can put a placeholder, we'll say enter text. Alright, and let's just see what that gives us. So we'll save it and reload. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is enable hot loading. So Control M, and then we'll say enable hot reloading. So now every time we save, it should reload, but sometimes when you change the state, you'll have to reload it for that to register. So just know that. Alright, so now we have our text input. If we click inside of it, you'll see the keyboard pop up, and we can either click these keys or we can just use our keyboard. Alright, now this text input, usually what we'll do is assign a state value to whatever this is going to be. Alright, so let's put in a constructor, and we'll say this.state, and let's set this, and then we'll say text value, and let's just set it to hello for now. Alright, and then in the text input we can say value equals this.state.text value. Okay, so we'll save that. Now see, the hot loading didn't reload the state, so we have to I'll just click reload down here, and that should do it. Alright, so now we get hello in our text input. Now let's output the state underneath it as well. So we'll put in a text like that, and then let's put this.state.text value. Okay, and then let's put in our event handler on change text. Okay, and we'll set that. Now we're going to pass along a property, so what we're going to do here is we're going to use an arrow function. So let's open up some parentheses, and we'll say value, and go like that, and set it to this dot on change text. You could call this whatever you want, and then pass in that value. Alright, so then let's create that function on change text. Okay, that's going to take in value, and let's just do console.log value. Alright, actually, you know what, let's not do console log, let's change the state. This.setState. Okay, we want to change text value, and we want to change that to the value that's being passed in as we type. And then we should see that here. We should see this change. So let's go ahead and save that. Alright, and I'm also going to just reload this manually. Okay, now if we click in here and I go and I delete, you'll see that the state is changing, and you can see that the proof of that right below it. Alright, so if we just say Brad, you'll see that the state is now changing as we type. Alright, now if you don't want to change things, if you don't want to fire your function as you're typing and you want it to do it actually when you submit it, you can use the event handler, what is it, on submit editing. Alright, so if we say on submit editing, and let's see, we can say, let's just do this dot on submit, and we'll just do a console log input submitted. Okay. So now, if I go and I click, if I type, you'll see we're not going to get the console log, but if I go and I click enter, you see input submitted. Okay. You also have on focus, you have on blur, there's a bunch of different event handlers you can use, and that should all be here in the documentation. Or not. Okay, I thought it was. It's somewhere in here. I'm not going to search for it now. Alright, but you have those different event handlers with the text input. Now we also have other input controls. I can't go through all of them because it'll take too long. We have the picker, the slider, and the switch. Alright, so let's do the switch because that's pretty easy. It's basically a true-false value. So we'll bring in switch. And I apologize if you can hear my son yelling upstairs. Alright, so we can put this switch, let's just put it right under here. It's not going to look very pretty, but who cares? So switch, and then we'll end it. And let's do, actually we'll put a value in the state for it. So let's just say switch value, and we'll set that to false. Alright, and then in here, let's do value equals this dot state dot switch value, and we'll save that. Okay, and there's our switch. Okay, now if I click it, you'll see it's not actually changing. Okay, the reason for that is we need to add an on value change property, and we're going to set that to this dot on switch change. Okay, actually, you know what? We want to send the value, so we're going to go value this on switch change value. Okay, and then what we'll do here is set the state. So I'm just going to grab this, and we're going to set the switch value. Make sure we pass it in here as well. Okay, now we'll save that. And now you see that it actually stays. Okay, so now it's set to true. We're actually changing the state value right here to true. Click it again, we can set it back to false. Alright, and the other inputs work pretty similar. It's pretty easy to figure out. See, I originally wanted this video to be an hour, but it looks like I can either stop now or I can keep going and make it an hour and a half or so. So I think I'm going to keep going because I want to give you guys an example of ListView and at least async storage and maybe some of the other APIs. So hopefully that's not too long for you guys. Alright, so let's go ahead and we'll keep this as component 3 and let's create a new one. Alright, and I realize I could break these up into separate videos, but I like to keep it all in one. And I also don't want to give too much away because I'm obviously promoting a course here, a premium course. Alright, and I'll get fired. Alright, so let's create a new folder. We'll say component 4. Component 4.js. And we'll grab this. Okay, get rid of that. Call this component 4. Okay. Alright, so let's go back to index Android and change this and this. Okay, so now we have our component 4. Now I want to give you a demonstration of the list view. So what I'm going to do is above the class, I'm going to create a variable called users and set that to an array. Okay, we'll give these users a name. Do one more. Let's say Janet Smith. Janet Williams. Okay, so we have these users. Now, usually you'd fetch this from an outside API or a database, and I'll try to show you how to do that as well. But for now, it's just local data. Now, the list view works kind of weird, and I really don't like some of it. So let's see. Let's go to list view. Now, what we have to do is create a variable for a data source. You'll see here, calling it ds, setting it to new ListView.dataSource, and then we have this weird row has changed, and then this condition right here. Okay, we have this R1 and R2 parameter, and then we have to say as long as R1 is not equal to R2. Okay, which is kind of strange, and I really don't like it, but that's what we have to do. And then we need to call that data source in our state. We'll set it to a state value, and then call clone with rows, and then pass in our data. So that's what we need to do. We need to bring in ListView up here for it to work. Okay, and then we're going to create a constructor. Okay, so let's just grab this. Okay, so we have ds we're setting it to the data source, row has changed, blah blah blah, and then we have our state, we're setting data source. Now you probably want to be more specific here. Let's say user data source, and then we're going to get rid of this array here and just pass in users. Now we're going to go down here to our render, and instead of rendering a view, let's render list view. Okay, now this needs to take in a data source. So data source, and we'll set it to this dot state dot user data source. Okay, and then it also has a property called render row, and then what you want to do is you want to have a function that's going to represent the row, and you can do whatever you want with it. So we'll say this dot render row. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bind the this value to that so that we can use it. So just say dot bind this. All right, now we'll create the render row. Okay. And the render row is actually going to get passed a user, okay, or to do, or whatever it is that you have as your data. All right. There's actually a few parameters that it gives us. There's user, then it gives us the section ID, and then the row ID, and then something called highlight row. But many times you'll just need the actual data, the actual user. All right, now inside render row, let's do view. Okay, say view, and then text. And then inside here, we should be able to do user.name. Okay, and that should render the username. Let's save that. Null is not an object. Let's try reloading manually. Alright, so a valid React element or null must be returned. You may have returned undefined. Let's see what's going on here. Let's see, we have user data source. Oh, I know what's wrong. In render row, we have to actually return this, not just put it in there like that. Oh. Let's try reloading manually. And there we go. Alright, so now we're rendering a list view, rendering our rows. Now I probably want to style this, so for the view, let's say style, and we'll set it to styles.row. And then the text, we'll set that to styles.rowText. Alright, and let's see, we need to make sure we put in StyleSheet up here. So styles equals StyleSheet dot create. And we have our row. And we'll use flexbox, so let's say flex direction, and we'll set that to row. We'll set justify content to center. Let's set padding to we'll say 10. Background, we'll do a light gray. And let's just set a margin bottom to 3. Alright, and then for the text, row text, I'm simply going to set flex 1. Alright, so if we save that and let that reload, oh, I put background, that should be background color. Okay, you see it's not exactly the same as CSS. Alright, so now we have our list view. Now, if you wanted to fetch the data from somewhere else, we can use fetch. And I think what I'm going to do here is create another component so I can show you how to do that. And then what we'll do is we'll add a touchable highlight to each one, and we'll implement the Navigator. And that way we can click on it, it'll open up another component, a details component, so we can see more details of the user. Alright, and I think that's where we're going to have to end it, because there's just not enough time, and you know, I can't just include the entire course on YouTube. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll create a new component. So we'll say new folder component 5, and let's say new file, component 5.js. Okay, and let's just copy what we have in index Android again. Change that. Component 5. And I'll have all this code available for you guys. Okay, then we'll go to index Android and just change this. Alright, so what I want to do now is, let's see, I actually probably should have just used component 4 because we're going to use a bunch of this stuff. Yeah, let's grab constructor, put that in component 5. Alright, and this is going to work a little different because we're not populating the data here. What we need to do is we need to hook into component did mount, just like you would with React, and that's where we're going to do our call to fetch the data from our API. And what we're going to use is JSON placeholder, which I use in a lot of my videos when we're working with APIs, basically a fake REST API. And we're going to get a list of users, okay, from this URL right here. Gives us a list of, I think, 100 users. So what we're going to do is this DS, we're going to keep this, okay, that's going to stay the same. And in the state, instead of doing the clone with rows here, we're not going to do that. We're going to just set it to that data source, that DS variable. All right, and then what we'll do is create a fetch users function. Okay, and we're gonna say fetch, and let's grab that URL. Okay, and this is asynchronous, so we're gonna say .then, and let's pass in another set of parentheses, response. We'll use an arrow function, and I just want to say response.json. Okay, make sure it's JSON content, and then we'll do another then. Pass in that response. Set that to a code block, and then we're going to set the state. Okay, and what we want to do here is take that user data source and set it to this.state user data source, and then here is where we want to do the clone with rows, and then we'll pass in that response. Okay, so that should do it. That should populate the list view, and then as far as rendering the list view, we can actually grab that from component 4. See, I should have just copied this whole thing, but that's alright. So we want to put that here. Okay, and then render row. Let's grab that. And I believe user does have a name. Okay, so that'll still work. And then we need to bring in ListView and also StyleSheet. Okay, and we'll grab the style from component 4 as well. Hopefully this isn't confusing. And let's see, let's save that. See if that works. Okay, let's try reloading. Oh, you know what? We didn't call fetch users. It's just sitting there. It's not being called. So what we need to do is hook into a lifecycle method called component did mount, and that's just standard React. So we'll say this dot fetch users. Okay, so hopefully that works. Let's try reloading manually. Sometimes that doesn't, hot loading doesn't. Undefined. Oh, okay. So we need to bind this to. Oh no, we did that. This dot render row bind this. Undefined is not a function. This dot fetch users. Oh, needs to be a capital U. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, good. So these users are coming from here, and I thought it was 100, but I guess it's 10. Okay, you can see Leanne Graham and Leanne Graham, and we can get any of this data we want. For instance, if we wanted to go to where we're rendering the row and just put, we can put a colon and then say user dot email and save that. Now you'll see that it's getting the email address. All right, good. All right, so the last thing I want to look at is navigation. All right. Now I know I said I was going to look at the API and stuff like that, and I'll probably going to include some of that in my next, not the next video I do, but the next React Native video that I do when we build an application. All right, but I think we hit on a lot of good points as far as how to get it set up, and also the formatting, the styling, some of the input controls, things like that. All right, so hopefully you guys don't get too disappointed. All right, and obviously the Navigator is a huge part of it as well. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create another component. So let's call this component 6. And let's see, component 6.js. Okay, we'll copy index Android. Change this name, component 6. And this is basically going to be the details component. And I know these components aren't named very well, but you know, we're just putting a bunch of stuff in here, and there's really no good names for these. And I just want to be consistent, so I don't want to call this something else. And let's see, for now we'll just say details. Alright, save that. And what we're going to do now is go back to index Android. And this is where we're going to implement the Navigator. So we're going to bring it in. And we want component 5, but we also want to bring in component 6. Okay, so we're going to import that as well, which is going to be the details. All right, and instead of in our render, instead of returning this view, we're going to return the Navigator. Okay, and this is going to take in a couple properties. One is going to be the initial route. So the initial route, we're going to set that to double curly brace, and we're going to give it an ID. And let's give it an ID of component, what is it, component 5. All right. Now ID, this could be anything you want. I think ID makes sense, but you could do route or page or something like that as well. All right, and then we need to have a property called render scene. Okay, so a scene is basically a view or a page or a component, whatever you want to call it. All right, so we're going to set that to this dot render scene, which we'll create in a minute. And then we're going to have configure screen, which is where you can kind of set some options. We're going to set this. We need to pass in some parentheses with a route and then a route stack. All right, and we can use this route to attach parameters to our routes. All right, and I'll show you how that works. So we want to set this to be an arrow function to navigator dot scene configs, and then we can choose the way that we want the pages to enter. I'm going to use float from bottom. And there's all types. There's float from right, left. If you look at the documentation, if we go to, let's see, where's Navigator? Is this it? Okay, so this basically is telling us all the stuff we're doing now. Let's see. Okay, I guess there's somewhere in the documentation that gives you a list of the different options as far as where this, float from bottom and all that. But we're just going to use that. All right, now we want to create the render scene function. Okay, so render scene, and that's going to take in the route parameter as well as the navigator itself. Not uppercase. Alright, now here's where we need to basically have a condition for this ID to see what scene it is or what page. So we're going to use a switch, and you can use an if statement if you want, but I think a switch makes more sense. So what we want to test is route.id. Now it's only ID because that's what we called it here. You could call this whatever you want. Alright, so let's put a case for component 5. Now, I'm really not happy with what I'm calling this, but we're kind of too deep into it now. But you could call this whatever you want, really. And it doesn't even, I don't know, this is fine, I guess. Alright, so that's what you get when you don't plan out from top to bottom what you're going to do. So we're going to just return, and we can return whatever we want here. You could return a view or whatever, but what we want to return is the component 5, which is the user list. Alright, so what we're going to do is just say component 5, and then we want to put title, and we're going to set that to component 5. Okay, and then we're going to go right under this, and let's copy that, and then this will be component 6. Change this and this. Okay. Now we want to be able to use the navigator from within these components, so we're going to pass that in as a property. So we'll say navigator equals navigator. Okay, I'm going to copy that. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that, and let's see what we get. Okay, we should see the same thing. We should see component 5, which is the list of users. Alright, so now what we're going to do is go into component 5, and what we want to happen is, now that our navigator is set up, we want to be able to click on one of these and open up the details page, which is component 6. Alright, so we're going to bring in touchable highlight. Okay, bring that in, and then we're going to wrap the row view with touchable highlight. Okay, now we're going to add an on press to the touchable highlight, and we're going to put a parentheses and then set that, use an arrow function, and then say this dot, and I guess we'll just call it on press. Alright, and then we want to pass along the user, which is coming from here when we render the row. Alright, so let's create on press, and that's going to take in the user. And then for now, just to test it out, let's do a console log user. Save that. And now if we click, let's say Curtis, you can see we get the highlight. And let's see, did that click on Curtis? Yep, right here. Okay, So we know that's working, and what we want to do is we want to use the Navigator, and since we passed it in to component 5 as a property, we can use it in here. Alright, and we just want to call this dot Navigator, this dot props, because it's a property, dot Navigator dot push. Alright, and then we want to pass along the ID of component 6, the details. Alright, if this was a real application, you'd probably call it details or something, or user details or something like that. Alright, but it's component 6 because that's what we called it here, or right here actually. Alright, so let's go ahead and just reload this manually. And now let's click one of these. And now you can see it slides over to the details. Alright, and we can actually just drag this down or drag it over, or maybe not. I thought we could do that. That's weird. Alright, I guess we could put a back button or something, but let's just reload it. Alright, now the details, I want to pass along that user's info. So to do that, all we have to do is in component 5 where we do the push. Now since we're passing in user right here, we'll just put another parameter, and we'll say user and set that to user. Alright, now in order for that to work, we need to go back to where we have our render scene, and we want to just specify that component 6 is going to take in a user property, and then we want to set that to route.user. Alright, and that'll allow us to pass a user in. So let's save that. And then back in component 6, we should now have access to that user. So let's go ahead and say, actually, you know what? A better thing to do would be to add it to the state. Alright, because we know it's coming in as a property, but we want to add it to the state of the component. So we'll say constructor, pass in props, okay, then we'll say this dot state, and let's set name equal to this dot props dot user dot name. Alright, we could do the same thing with email and any other properties that it has. Alright, and then down here, let's put in this dot state dot name. Alright, we'll put another one with the email as well. Okay, so hopefully that works. Let's save it. Okay, transform error. Let's try reloading. Sometimes that works. Unexpected token. Let's see. Oh, I'm an idiot. I have I put the constructor in the render. I don't feel like going back and editing that, so you guys are just gonna have to think I'm an idiot. Let's reload. Okay, so now let's click on Leanne. And there we go. Brings us to the details page, and we passed in the user, which we set a name and an email as state coming from the properties of that user. Alright, and I'm not going to worry about making this look good. I will be doing a video where we build an actual app and make it look good, but for now, just trying to get the fundamentals out there for you guys. Now, we probably want a button to go back. So what I'll do is we could use touchable highlight or opacity, but there's actually a button component too. So if we just take that and let's put that here. And we'll put in, just like touchable highlight, we can do on press. And let's set that to this dot on press. We'll give it a title. Okay. So what we can do is we can use the Navigator again. We'll say this dot Navigator or props.navigator dot push, and let's give it an ID of component 5, okay, which is the list of users. Save that. There's our button. Click go back. Undefined is not an object. All right, so it's giving us that error because we need to bind this to the on press. Okay, because we're using this here. All right, so that brings us back to the user list. So we can now just we can go to any user page we want, and we can go back. All right, so that's going to have to be the end of the video, guys. I really hope that you at least understand the core basic concepts of React Native. There's a ton more here that you can go through. Scroll views, status bar, toolbars, all that. And like I said, the Eduonics course, we actually create dozens of mini components like this using different components here, and also down here the APIs. Okay, we look at async storage, camera roll, to look at photos on the phone. There's a lot of content, so I would definitely suggest it if you're interested in React Native. All right, so thanks for watching, guys. If you're still with me, thanks. This was a long video, and I will see you next time.